everybody, famous American Indian law cases. When I was in law school, I pursued and obtained a certificate in federal Indian law because that's the area of practice I wanted to go in. And although we probably studied well over 100 cases that were famous for Indian law cases that pertain to Indian law and that still affect a lot of things that we deal with today in Indian country, I'm going to cover at least 6 that we learned while I was pursuing my federal Indian law certificate. The first one is Johnson v. McIntosh. In Johnson v. McIntosh, this is one of the 3 cases that people refer to as the Marshall Trilogy. Basically, it ruled that private citizens cannot sell or cannot purchase land from Native Americans. Basically, that set off what is referred to now as the Discovery Doctrine. It still affects Native Americans today that own trust land or restricted land, and how you have to go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs to get permission just to sell your land. Okay. The next case in the Marshall Trilogy was Cherokee versus Georgia. In Cherokee versus Georgia, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, Cherokee Nation asked the court to stop Georgia from enforcing its laws within their territory. The courts ruled basically that they had no jurisdiction. However, what came out of that case when it went to the Supreme Court is that what is now known as that tribes are considered as domestic dependent nations. They're not states, they're not foreign nations. Justice Marshall ruled that they're domestic dependent nations, which is a term that I really, really dislike, but it still sticks with us today. The last case in the Marshall Trilogy is Hoosier versus Georgia. In Georgia, basically what came out of that is that Justice Marshall ruled that the laws of Georgia shall have no effect within Cherokee Nation. And that basically laid the foundation for tribal sovereignty. And those 3 cases combined laid the foundation for the rest of federal Indian law as we currently know it. And all of those rulings really don't apply today as they did back then. They still laid the foundation for federal Indian law. So the next case I'm going to talk about is basically a criminal jurisdiction case. Ex parte Crow Dog, right? So an ex parte Crow Dog, he's a Native American that killed another Native American. The 2 families within the tribes came together. They decided what the punishment would be. I think it was like $600, some horses and some blankets. Well, the local jurisdiction did not like that. They were upset. They wanted to pursue the death penalty against Crow Dog. However, the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that since the tribe had already made the decision and had already tried Crow Dog, he had already been tried and he had already been dealt his punishment with the way the tribe described it, that local jurisdiction cannot come in and overrule that. That case ultimately led to the passage by Congress of the Major Crimes Act. Why? Because the local jurisdiction, after that case, after the Supreme Court ruled the way they did, of course, they ran to Congress and said, we've got to do something about this. So Congress passed what's called the Major Crimes Act. So that way, any crime such as murder, kidnapping, and there's a whole laundry list, even if it occurs on an Indian reservation between 2 Native Americans, that the local jurisdiction of the Major Crimes Act can still apply, and federal law enforcement would then have jurisdiction over tribal jurisdiction. That's basically, in a nutshell, what ex parte Crow Dog is about. The next case, Elk v. Wilkins. So this is an interesting case because it involves the citizenship of a Native American, this is back in the 1800s, keep in mind, that was born on the Winnebago Reservation. He was Winnebago. He later moved off the reservation to Omaha, Nebraska. He wanted to denounce his citizenship or his allegiance to his tribe, and he wanted to basically become an American citizen under the 14th Amendment that grants birthright citizenship to anybody who is born in this country on American soil. Well, he tried to vote. He was denied his right to vote, and the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that he is not a citizen because he was not under the jurisdiction of the United States at the time he was born. He was a Native American that was born on the Winnebago Reservation. Therefore, the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship did not apply to him. That eventually led to the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. Okay, the last case I'm going to talk about in the famous American Indian law cases that I learned while I was in law school is Tolton v. Mays. And this one basically pertains to individual rights. Basically, the court ruled that individual rights like the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment do not apply to tribal governments. And so in this case, Tolton, Bob Tolton, was convicted of or charged with murder, I believe, on Cherokee Nation. There's a grand jury that they had brought together on Cherokee Nation land. However, he argued that they didn't comply with the federal or state law in regards to the number of people that are required to be on a grand jury before they can indict him. However, the court ultimately ruled that the jurisdiction laid within the tribe, right? And so the 15th and 14th Amendment, individual rights, did not apply to the tribal governments. This eventually led back all the way down in 1968 to the passage of the Indian Civil Rights Act. So even though the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, do not directly apply to tribal governments even to this day, due to the passage of the Indian Civil Rights Act, which contains most of the Bill of Rights under the Constitution, Native American tribes are required to provide those individual rights to its tribal citizens that are under its jurisdiction on its tribal lands. Anyway, those are the top 6 cases that I learned in law school when I was pursuing the Federal Indian Law Certificate. I'll probably do a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4 because there were so many cases that we learned. A lot of them are interesting and a lot of them still apply today. If you like what you hear and see, please give me a like and follow, and please share and repost, all right? Appreciate all of you guys that continue to follow me. Ha-ho.